everyone. Apologies for the late start. We were having some slight technical difficulties. I am William Walton, and I am here tonight with...
I am Miller.
We're filling in for Andy here on the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, where generally we just try to cut through the BS in the establishment and bring you that deft leftist analysis of the news. So today we're going to start off by talking about Kalamazoo Public Schools. They've just announced the candidates for next superintendent. And would you like to lead off with that?
Yes, sure. So I will first read off the first couple of the candidates that they have. They shortened the field down from 36 people to 6 people on Monday, January 20th. So the candidates that are currently in the running are Efe Agbuma. They are the Assistant Superintendent of Schools at St. Paul Public Schools in St. Paul, Minnesota. Robert Benke, who is the Superintendent of Adrian Public Schools in Adrian, Michigan. We also have Rita Ray-Chuduri, Executive Director of Early College and Career Education at Chicago Public Schools in Chicago. And then Darren Slade, Assistant Superintendent of School Leadership at Kansas City Public Schools in Kansas City, Missouri. And then Matthew Wandry, who is Superintendent of Lapierre Community Schools in Lapierre, Michigan. And then Phoebe Williams, who is Learning Area Superintendent and School Support Officer for Guilford County School in Greensboro, North Carolina. And you can find more information about all of them on MLive websites. And would also like to apologize for any of the names that I butchered because I am not great with names.
That's understandable. So unfortunately, like I said, Andy couldn't make it tonight. I am not local enough to the Kalamazoo area to really know much about what the district needs or doesn't need. But again, those are the candidates, so if you'd like to learn more about them, that information is available through MLive. But our next story here seems kind of, really cool, actually. I'd heard a little bit about it earlier. So this is, again, from MLive. Crimes could be removed from your record in Kalamazoo. And I'll just read the first couple paragraphs, then we'll discuss it. So, and this is by Brad Devereaux at MLive. People with criminal records can have them expunged at a new free clinic offered by the City of Kalamazoo and partner agencies. The Kalamazoo City Attorney's Office has partnered with the Kalamazoo Defender Office, Kalamazoo County Bar Association, and county courts to create an expungement clinic in Kalamazoo meant to eliminate a barrier to potential employment for people with criminal records. The first event of 2020 will be held from 2 to 5 p.m. Friday, February 7th at the North Side Association for Community Development. And here's a quote from Josh Hilgert, the Executive Director of Kalamazoo Defender. Criminal convictions can operate like an anchor around the necks of our friends, neighbors, and family members. This initiative will improve their chances at making a fresh start. So it goes on to explain how under the partnership, Defender's Office will organize a second criminal record expungement event in the second quarter of this year and establish a drop-in expungement clinic at each Friday at its offices. So this is very important because I think, as we all know, having a criminal record can really harm your ability to find a job, anything really. It follows you. And a lot of crimes, after a certain time, are eligible for expungement. But it can be a whole process. A lot of people don't know about it. So a lot of people can be held down by something that they really don't need to be. There are other options. What do you think about this, Aya?
I think it's definitely a very positive thing that they're doing. I know a lot of people are shut out of the job process, and also the process is to get public housing and then to live in certain spaces because they have a criminal record. And I think it could be a very positive thing to open up doors for a lot of people in Kalamazoo who maybe made an unfortunate mistake or who shouldn't have a crime following them around and preventing them from achieving certain things in life, and then having access to certain basic things that most people would take for granted.
Definitely. I read more about this. I believe I actually met some of the people who were behind this earlier this year. I was covering a press event where some state representatives, bipartisan actually, were unveiling some new legislation that would expand expungement, what's able to be expunged, when it can be expunged, and so forth. And some of these questions that were discussed at this press event included things like, okay, well, how are we going to make people aware of this? And I remember this concept being discussed. I don't know how far along it was in the organization then, but just an interesting side note there. Again, expungement is very important just because, again, I don't think we can stress how hard it can be to get good paying jobs when you have a record. And it follows you around.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like hopefully, I'm not sure if this was maybe their goal, but hopefully it could maybe reduce recidivism rates in Michigan, because I know that's often what drives people to go back and commit crime, because they're not able to find housing or jobs after they get out of prison, and then they're driven back to committing crimes because they don't have access to that, and then they don't have any money. And hopefully that would keep more people out of prisons. I really don't know if that was their goal. I wouldn't really expect it to be their goal, but I think if it helped with that, it could definitely be a step in the right direction in many ways, and maybe also an example for the nation as a whole going forward.
Definitely, 100%. All right, it's time we take just a quick break. Before we do, I'm just going to read off some interesting concerts that are happening in Kalamazoo upcoming this week. So tomorrow night at 8 p.m. at the Greenhouse, there will be Summer Brews, Former Critus, Weekdays, and Garbage Guys. Again, that is at 8 p.m. tomorrow at the Greenhouse. And then Friday at 8 p.m., also at the Greenhouse, there is Sweet Peach, Bombastic, A Dream, Tunnel Songs, and Kevin Kinda Sucks. Both those coming up. Really looking forward to those. With that, we're just going to take a brief break as we prepare our next stories to discuss. We're definitely going to discuss what went down between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, some more about the election and stuff like that, as well as some other stories, all that coming up. So this is just a brief break. Thank you for tuning in to us here on the Hoodrat Strategist radio program at 89.1 FM WIDR. Welcome back to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. I'm William Walton.
And I am Aya Miller.
And now we're going to be taking a look at the state of Michigan, who is suing 17 companies over PFAS, the contaminants that are in the state's water supplies. And this is taken from Paul Egan over at Detroit Free Press. The state of Michigan filed a suit Tuesday against 3M, DuPont, and 15 other companies on accusations of contaminating the state with dangerous PFAS chemicals, known as forever chemicals because they are slow to break down in the environment. Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Attorney General Dana Nessel announced the suit, followed in Washtenaw Circuit County Court. Companies that are responsible for these contaminants must be held accountable, Whitmer said. Polluters must pay. It's time that these companies step up and take the responsibility and address what has taken place. Nessel described the lawsuit as an important part of fighting PFAS. She said that the companies knew or should have known about the dangers of the chemicals to human and animal health, but failed to disclose what they knew. Instead, the companies went to great lengths to promote the lie that the chemicals were safe, she said. So this is a really big deal. These companies have basically, rather the chemicals used by these companies have poisoned a great deal of the state of Michigan's water. These are dangerous chemicals that don't break down, and they just build up over time. They're dangerous chemicals, and there's been just so much discussion going on throughout the state. Been to so many press conferences about what is to be done about this. And there's been a lot of solutions, and I hope we find a way to address this. But this is good, I think, because it's holding companies accountable. Again, the following views and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or the Western Michigan University, but this is a good thing. One of the biggest problems I think we see for a long time, but especially today, and since Reagan and deregulation, is a failure to really keep companies accountable. When you look at a lot of crimes committed by companies and how they're punished, they're usually punished in the form of fees that really don't do much to deter bad behavior, because a lot of times these fees are less than what the cost of actually following the law would be for these companies. But we're looking at this, and I haven't seen a dollar value yet of what this lawsuit could bring, but this could potentially, depending on court rulings, be a major blow towards these companies and also towards righting the wrongs of PFAS. Chemical companies like DuPont and Dow have a long history of saying chemicals are safe when they aren't. If we remember in Vietnam, the exposure of soldiers to Agent Orange and such. So I'm glad to see the state reacting to that. What do you think, Aya?
I think it's 100% a move in the right direction. It's a great move. I think it's horrible that companies are taking advantage of the state and thinking that it's okay to let these chemicals leak into the water supply, where they're going to affect thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands. And it's really greed and selfishness that allows them to think that it's okay that they do that. And I think it's really important that the state of Michigan stands with its residents and saying, no, enough is enough. This is not okay. And that these chemicals need to be cleaned up, and that the companies are the ones who should be footing the bill and not the taxpayers, because the taxpayers didn't ask for their water to be invaded with these toxic chemicals.
No, we definitely did not. And on a similar note, more good news, this taken from NPR, the Supreme Court has allowed Flint water lawsuits to move forward, saying that officials are not immune. Again, this is taken from NPR, Vanessa Romo reporting. The Supreme Court on Tuesday cleared the way for water crisis victims to sue the state and local government officials in Flint, Michigan, For years, Flint city officials and state regulators have argued that they are protected by qualified immunity from being sued for their role in the water contamination crisis, but lower courts have ruled to the contrary. And refusing to take up a pair of cases involving the lead-tainted water, the Supreme Court has upheld those lower court rulings. Attorney Michael Pink, co-lead counsel on the class action lawsuit, which includes thousands of Flint residents suing for damages from the 2014 incident, welcomed the decision as a major victory. He said, "It's time for the people of Flint to start feeling like they're going to get their day in court. This just moves that entire process closer to that day." Again, this is important for very similar reasons in that it's keeping people accountable. It's giving a way for the people to use the legal system to keep the government officials who are behind the Flint crisis responsible. Rick Snyder and other officials have been trying to claim that they are immune from their actions, that their actions, they cannot be held legally liable for them because they were acting, in good faith on behalf of the state. What this lawsuit is saying is that there is no such immunity there. These actions were something that these people can be held legally liable for. And again, I think that's very important. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they should definitely. I don't understand why we would even consider giving companies immunity, because they do not operate above the law and above the law of the law that common people have to follow. Even though they're protected by this company structure, it does not mean they can kind of take initiative in only securing their profits and whatever's best for them. And then that really should not be something that is allowed in a democracy. And it's great that the state is advocating for that. And then especially in Flint, where the residents have been harmed so much by companies being able to go after and just do whatever they want. And then with the entire water crisis that they have there, it's steps in the right direction, and it's a start.
Definitely. And then just for clarity's sake, because we have two very similar stories that we're talking about side by side here, just want to clarify so that this immunity protections no longer exist. These are for individuals like Rick Schneider and stuff, and that is the Flint lead crisis, which is separate from the lawsuit against the companies in the PFAS crisis. I just want to make sure that part was clear. But in both cases, the point we've been trying to make here is very good things, moves to start keeping people accountable for what they do that affects us all. It's about 6:30 now, which means it is time for a public service announcement break. We're going to take just a quick break, send you some messages, and then when we come back, it'll be time to discuss what's been going on with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. And then also, I think, would you like to talk a little bit about Elizabeth Warren and Sanders as well?
Oh, yeah.
I think that's definitely relevant.
A fantastic tie-in.
Very much so. So just one quick break, and then we'll be back with those stories and more.
Hey there, water listeners. Know what's even cooler than supporting Radio Evolution? Driving safe in the winter.
So listen to Zia's tips.
If you want to drive safe, keep a safe distance from other drivers. If you find yourself sliding out of control, turn into the skid to regain control of the vehicle. And if visibility is low, go slow. Don't be afraid to go under the speed limit if you have to. Last but not least, stay warm and keep extra blankets in your trunk or back seat in case of emergency. This has been a friendly reminder from Wider.
Not be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Depression can take many forms. It can feel like static in your brain, or as if everything around you has lost meaning. It can debilitate even the strongest of people. 89.1 WIDR is here to tell you that there is help and a way to improve mental health. WMU offers counseling for all students in the greater Kalamazoo community at Syndicuse Health Center. There is no need for an appointment for first-time visits. Open counseling times are Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Syndicuse is located at 1903 West Michigan Avenue, Kalamazoo. For more information, please call 269-387-3287 or visit www.wmich.edu/health center.
Well, hello, listeners to WIDR 89.1. We are back here with the Hoodrat Strategist. I am Aya Miller, and
I'm William Walton. Thanks for coming back.
Yep. Right now we're going to discuss the blast that Hillary Clinton made against Bernie Sanders just recently in her new documentary, and then also after that, the kind of beef between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren we've seen play out in the past week. I'm going to read a couple paragraphs from this article on CNN that we have here. Hillary Clinton blasts Senator Bernie Sanders in a new documentary, saying nobody likes him and declining in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter to say whether she would endorse and campaign for him if he's the Democratic 2020 nominee. He was in Congress for years. He had one senator support him. Nobody likes him. Nobody wants to work with him. He got nothing done, Clinton says in the film. According to The Hollywood Reporter, he was a career politician. It's all just baloney, and I feel so bad that people got sucked into it. The comments in the documentary are aimed directly at his core campaign appeal, that he's a political outsider pitching revolutionary change. The new round of lacerating attacks comes less than 2 weeks before the Iowa caucuses, which Clinton narrowly won in 2016, and where Sanders is locked in a tight four-way race this year. They also have the potential to reignite a divisive four-year-old fight that has never fully faded from Democrats' minds. More recently, and in comments seen since her loss to President Donald Trump, Clinton has blamed Sanders for damaging her campaign. In response to Clinton's remarks, Sanders said in a statement that his focus was President Donald Trump's impeachment trial. Together we are going to go forward and defeat the most dangerous president in American history, Sanders said. Well, I think it is definitely an interesting turn of events that Hillary Clinton would come out of the woodwork and make this documentary and these comments against Sanders. I think at the end of the day, it's really counterintuitive to what needs to be done, especially at this point in the election. If the goal is to defeat Donald Trump, then we don't need to be then Democrats don't need to be attacking each other. And then whoever ends up getting the nomination, I think it's important that whatever powerful Democrats that they are who want to make a statement should just go and support them instead of going against them and then really trying to hurt their campaign. Will, what do you think?
Most definitely, but I think this speaks to, you brought up that point about what needs to be done if the goal is to defeat Donald Trump. And this story, as well as others that have been coming out, sort of have convinced me that, at least for the corporate side of the Democratic Party, the goal in 2020 is not to defeat Trump at all costs. They certainly hope that they beat him for the presidency if they can have Joe Biden, Michael Bloomberg, or even, I suspect, Elizabeth Warren they'd be happy with. But I think this speaks to the fact that for corporate Democrats and the billionaires that sponsor them, like Jeff Bezos, who typically self-identifies as a Democrat, 4 more years of Trump is less scary than 4 more years of Sanders. If you, again, are someone like Jeff Bezos, you might not like what Trump's doing, but he lets you keep your billions. He's not going to start pushing for Medicare for all, labor rights and such that would completely disrupt Amazon's way of business. So it's a known variable. Someone like Sanders is much scarier to a Jeff Bezos, I think, and I think that's what we're seeing here. A certain hesitancy amongst these, right or centrist Democrats to support Sanders and instead focus on preserving the status quo. They would try to, weather the storm, then go around it, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like their goal here really is to maintain the status quo, and that's at the risk of losing the election in 2020. And I personally, I think it's a very negative thing that they should not be doing, and that's really detrimental to the future of this country. And I feel like for Hillary to say these comments, it's also not surprising with Bernie aligning himself with the policies that he has aligned himself with. I think when I first read this story, it actually made me kind of laugh. I was like, okay, Hillary, did this is not unexpected. Of course, the corporate Democrats would be against Bernie because he's for all these progressive policies that would, at the end of the day, help the American people and not the billionaires who hold the power right now. So I think it's just Hillary Clinton trying to get herself back into the mix, and I really don't know what her goal here is because at this point she's just unhelpful and counterintuitive.
Counterintuitive, but I suspect that at least in some districts this might help Sanders, especially some of those districts where Hillary just could have won but lost due to poor campaign management. Sanders does now have the capacity to run on the platform of explicitly not endorsed by Hillary Clinton. For a lot of reasons, most of them not good reasons. There's a lot of reasons to be critical of Hillary Clinton, but what I found is that in the areas where her name is treated like poison, they're not usually thinking of those good reasons, but nonetheless, her name is poison in a lot of areas, especially in northwestern rural Michigan where I'm from. So I think this might actually be a huge boon to Bernie.
Oh, that's an
in those
excellent
areas.
point. I feel like I haven't been super involved in the campaign processes recently and really getting deep into it and looking into it, but I wonder if there are Democratic supporters who backed Hillary and who actually ended up voting for Trump, and maybe this would motivate them to go more towards Bernie's side. Do you think that could happen at all?
let me make sure I understand. So you're asking if there are any Democrats or traditional Democrats who ended up voting for Trump because they disliked Hillary in 2016, now voting for Sanders. Is that what you're
Yes.
asking? In that case, most definitely. This is again just coming from experience. I don't have any hard data with me, but my experience in the Grand Traverse region, amongst, working people, Sanders does have, weirdly enough, a lot of the same appeal Trump had, very different people, and I am not at all suggesting they're the same, but what I am saying is that there's a great appeal of both those candidates amongst working people up north. I saw it this summer when I was there, still see it when I go up and visit and just talk to people, so definitely, I think, again, this could end up being a big help to him.
Yeah, I feel like one thing that's very positive for Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders is that they're both very populist candidates and that people appeal to that, and then hopefully that could help attract some of Donald Trump's supporters more than an Elizabeth Warren or a Joe Biden or a Tom Steyer would.
Definitely. And while we're here, let's talk about Elizabeth Warren, too. So What happened, Aya? What happened?
Well, essentially, so Elizabeth Warren, if I have this correctly, her campaign team, and then she accused Bernie Sanders of telling her that a woman could not win the election in a closed-door meeting that happened a while back. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's the gist of it. So the accusation here is that Bernie Sanders is a sexist who doesn't think a woman should be president. This is the story. CNN actually held on to it for about a while, which we talk about it all the time on the show. There's a lot to be critical of CNN's coverage, especially of the Sanders campaign. And this is just one example that they held this story for a long time until it looked like Sanders was pulling ahead, especially of Warren. And they released a story saying Sanders is sexist. He doesn't think women should run for president. The issue is, and I was amazed and laughed at how immediate this was within minutes of the first time I saw this story, I saw the Sanders campaign bringing up, 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 10-year-old footage, 4-year-old footage of Bernie Sanders being like, I believe a woman could and should be president of the United States. So either he completely flipped, changed his stance with, decades of this being on record, or he didn't say it. And it's been looking more and more like he didn't say it. And it's, from my perspective, a really big just failure of the Warren campaign to even, bring it up and insinuate it. Because all it's done is taken supporters away from her. When I look at the polls, Sanders is still going up. And most of those voters are coming not from Biden or Bloomberg. They're coming from Warren. She was the one candidate with the most overlap with him. And I think she's kind of shot herself in the foot here. The same way I think Beto O'Rourke shot himself in the foot when he talked about guns in Texas this summer. If you don't remember, his comment was, hell yes, we are going to take your AR-15. And I completely understand the sentiment. It was right after the El Paso shootings. He's from Texas. Understand his convictions. Respect him so much when he said that. But it was a campaign failure to understand that you cannot be the Democratic centrist candidate from Texas and say that in Texas and win. So I think this was going to be a defining moment of the primary process.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. I agree. What was Warren's campaign thinking? I feel like people try to attack Bernie Sanders on a lot of fronts that are really easily disputable, like when people try to call him an anti-Semite and then he's literally Jewish.
Yeah.
But it seems like I wouldn't even call it a lapse in judgment. I think it's trying to attack Bernie Sanders on a front when they know they really can't attack him on anything. And then hopefully, and then I feel like this has played out, especially in what I've seen on Twitter, especially how people are kind of realizing this is kind of, it seems as if people are interpreting it as Warren showing her true colors and showing that she's not necessarily a super trustworthy candidate, which I think could be even more detrimental than just losing some supporters to Sanders, because it kind of reminds me of how the narrative around Hillary Clinton being untrustworthy came up in the 2016 election, and then I think it would be a shame if it arrived with Warren, because I don't think that Elizabeth Warren is a horrible candidate, but I think this definitely does drastically hurt her chances of winning the nomination and winning the support of certain voters.
Definitely, and it is important to note that CNN did hold this story for maximum effect. So I think there's a push responsibility here. But it is important to remember that while compared to candidates like Michael Bloomberg and Joe Biden, Warren seems quite progressive. She isn't necessarily. She identified as Republican for a long time, and then also just recent statements. She identifies herself as, quote, a capitalist through and such. She had voter overlap with Sanders, certainly, but is still very much a Democrat through and through, not an independent who caucuses with the Democrat, which I think is a big difference and has led to this. One moment, though, is when the CNN mics did pick up Elizabeth Warren talking to Sanders after the debate, and she said, quote, "I feel like you just called me a liar on national television," because the discussion had come up during the debate. And while he kind of did, from what I can gather, this story, at least as it's been reported, could not have happened in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. It feels like when I heard that comment, it kind of felt like a nonsense comment that could blow up into a huge story. And that really kind of, and especially from seeing how people reacted, it made her seem like this really manipulative person who was trying to create this story, and especially since the mics were on. And I read that, I don't know if this is accurate, but I read that they both knew the mics were on. And knowing that, it really seems like a really muddy situation where it's really campaign manipulation rather than an honest disagreement.
It really does. And just to speak to the Sanders side of things, from what I can gather, it's been reported so many different ways, but just from what I can gather, the closest thing to what Sanders likely said, if he said anything, was more along the lines of, listen, if you run in this thing and if you win the primary, just know Trump is going to campaign harder against you because you're a woman, and you're going to need to be prepared for that. That was the sentiment that was conveyed to her, that she's saying, you know, he said a woman shouldn't be president. It's clearly not that. If he said anything at all, it's, from what I can gather, much more along the lines of, hey, just be prepared, which, if anything, to me is, while sad that that's advice that needs to be given, is the state of, especially the Midwest today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that all of this is going down, especially right before the Iowa caucuses, is really a shame. And it does no favors for the Democratic Party. There's really nothing positive that can come of it, except from supporters going from a particular camp and joining another one.
Definitely. With that, it's about 6:50, so we need to go to just one more break real quick. But with that, when we get back, we'll be talking about some of our Martin Luther King Day coverage.
Yes, indeed.
name's DJ Red Special, and I host the Iron Temple. Each Monday night at 10 o'clock p.m., I'm in here playing a wide variety of metal music, including black metal, doom metal, progressive metal, death metal, and more. We're rocking out to classic tracks from years past, as well as fresh tracks from brand new releases. If you want to hear what all this heavy metal noise is all about, take a journey to the Iron Temple, right here on 89.1 FM, WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for metal evolution.
Nonprofit organization looking for new ways to get its name out to Western's campus and the greater Kalamazoo community? Why not use the wider airwaves? For more information on how we can promote your organization and events, go to widrfm.org and click on the airtime and sponsorship page.
Hello, we are back here with the Hoodrat Strategist on WIDR FM 89.1. I am Aya Miller.
And I'm William Walton.
Right now we have, Will, would you like to introduce it?
Yeah, so we're just going to take a look. So this Monday, if you didn't notice, hopefully you did, was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and Western Michigan University, amongst other things, hosted a teach-in where every 30 minutes there were keynote speakers talking about different things associated with Martin Luther King. So we're just going to talk about 3 of those presentations that seem particularly relevant to you, our audience. So the first of these I want to take a look at, this is actually a story I wrote for the Western Herald. They'll be taking some of this info from, but some of it will just be, well, I was there, so stuff that didn't make it into the story. But the history of human life is the history of this struggle. Martin Luther King Day speaker discusses class, capital, and modern America. And this was when Bill Farmer, he's a former labor negotiator for unions who is now associated with the Southwest Michigan Democratic Socialists of America and Labor for Bernie. And I'll just read you the beginning of the story to give you a sense of what he talked about and discuss him some. So, how did we come to this? Bill Farmer sought to answer that one question in his presentation for WMU's Martin Luther King Day teach-in. This being ever-growing levels of economic inequality and injustice that he has seen both throughout his own life and throughout history. The issue of inequality has been going on for millennia, especially since the advent of the written word. You see this struggle between serf and lord, between master and slave. It's always been there, he said. The history of human life is the history of this struggle. So in his presentation, he talked about economic inequality and how it affects everyone. He brought up the fact that if the average worker were getting the same sort of raises yearly that were made up until the 70s on average, the average worker right now would be making $70,000 a year. That is no longer the case, clearly, as anyone who lives in this economy can tell you. And then further on, he went to talk about how these economic injustices work to exasperate racial injustices because of the historical and systemic oppression of people of color in the United States. They simply, don't have the capital and the means to move between the classes. Not that many groups do, but it's especially oppressive to persons of color. He said, here, it's so incredibly difficult to accumulate wealth. Workers across the board make less real income than they did in 1970. Wages and benefits are shrinking, and for 90% of our population, home ownership represents the largest accumulation of wealth possible. It's the only kind of wealth that you can leave to your family for them to build on, but people can't afford houses anymore. These things affect everyone, but they really affect African Americans. They're disproportionately affected by these decisions, Farmer said. So it was a very interesting presentation. What was really interesting to me, and I say interesting, it was sad, but in You'll see. So he talked later in presentation on tying it back into Martin Luther King Jr. Day about the economic side of Martin Luther King's movement that's never really discussed. He brought up this quote from Dr. King. If America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. Again, that's a quote from Dr. King. And after the presentation, I'm out in the hallway, getting ready to go write up my story on it. There are these group of like middle-aged white people, and they're all talking. I used to hear them go, "It's so disgusting of them to have made Martin Luther King so politicized. Like, he'd feel so ashamed of this." And I walked away shaking my head. I went downstairs to write the story, but I didn't know how to comprehend that. We talk a lot about these separate realities that people seem to live in these days, how people get so insulated into their own bubbles. And I just can't imagine looking at Martin Luther King and thinking, yeah, this man, the civil rights movement, that was an entirely apolitical process. Like, no politics here. It's nonsense, isn't it, Aya? Would you say so?
It 100% is. That is astounding. I can't believe I just wonder how they were raised, what they learned in school, just what possibly could have been going on in their heads at that moment, because it doesn't make sense to me, especially how I was raised. My parents made an effort to teach me and my brother, I have a little brother, about civil rights issues and issues that are important to the black community, especially being a black woman myself. And then for as long as I can remember, I was aware that Martin Luther King Jr. was a very political figure who fought for workers' rights and human rights, and most importantly civil rights for African Americans at the time, and very strategically partnered with certain political movements in order to advance their agenda, and also working with not directly working with Malcolm X, but I feel like he often too gets a really bad rap, and I feel like Malcolm X is maybe one of my favorite civil rights era figures. And then at least in the readings that I've done, they didn't necessarily collaborate. Maybe in the future, if Malcolm X hadn't been assassinated, they would have, but they definitely were moving towards being on the same page. And I really don't understand how some people think like that. And I think at the end of the day, it's another tool to keep people, and especially African Americans in this country, oppressed.
Definitely, I can see that. I know we talk about like these two, different realities, different Americas. I come from just the whitest, most rural part of the state possible, northwest Michigan, middle of the woods, farm town. And throughout high school history, civil rights was just always kind of brushed over. It's really sad, but like we mentioned, like Martin Luther King existed, but what he did, how he did it, nothing was discussed about. And I didn't really learn about it until I got to college. And I think that's a real shame because, like you said, it just perpetuates hate and violence, really.
Yeah, and I think also learning in the Black Student Union on campus, we recently had a discussion about miseducation and how, especially for a lot of black students in the country and a lot of black people in the country, period, it helps to keep you oppressed if you don't know the power you have, and if you think that all of your descendants were enslaved and you really have no strength, then it's always white people that came to your rescue, then you really don't think you have any power within yourself to escape the circumstances that you are in that exist now. And just reading, I have an article here from The Guardian. It's actually projected that the wealth for African Americans in this country will reach zero by the year 2053, which is completely astounding. And then the fact that people are still thinking in that format, and then people really aren't paying attention to this and using the MLK Day holiday as a chance to become informed about these topics is really, it's insane, and it needs to change.
It most definitely does. We have time. Unfortunately, we're going to have a bit of a shorter show today. Like you said, we're covering for Andy, who's unable to make it. He's doing some great work in the community tonight. But we have time for, would you like to talk about the story you sat in for on
Sure,
Martin King Day?
absolutely. So I sat in for Kalamazoo area preacher Nathan Dennison. I can read the first couple of paragraphs now. You can find the article on the Western Herald website. But he basically talked about white privilege in certain civil movements. So Kalamazoo area teacher, organizer, and preacher Nathan Dennison explored the intersection of class consciousness and civil rights as a speaker at WMU's Martin Luther King Jr. Day teach-in. Dennison said that the advancement of civil rights is in white America's self-interest, explaining that civil rights movements can blossom into broad movements against social and economic injustice. The issue facing larger-scale change, Dennison explained, is that many white Americans lack class consciousness. This means that they fail to recognize the ways in which the current social-economic system hurts everyone. So I thought that his presentation was very interesting, and he talked, at the beginning of the presentation, he gave a little personal context in talking about how he grew up in the church and how it wasn't entirely realized the effect that they had or the effect that they could have, and that he, for the longest time, was in this white liberal mindset, and then he explained how that couldn't really make any effective change because he couldn't think about any issues critically. And I thought that was very interesting in how he spoke about that. And then how he also tied it into the Poor People's Campaign in Memphis, Tennessee, and how Martin Luther King Jr. advocated for that campaign, but he didn't necessarily lead that campaign. It was the people in Tennessee that led that campaign, because while MLK had experience, he didn't have the personal experience in that particular area to serve as a leader. And then that shifted Dennison into his point of there's a difference between organizers and leaders. And I'll just read this quote from the end of the article right here. "Leaders are people for whom their self-interest and lived experiences intersect," Dennison said. "Organizers oftentimes have privileges that can be weaponized to the benefit of the leaders." And I think that's very true, and especially when it comes to racial divides and movements like this. It's really important to realize the privileges that you have and consciously use those to aid other people. And I'm glad that his talk had a pretty good turnout, and I'm glad it did, and I hope people take this and kind of ruminate on it and then think about how they can apply these lessons to their own lives.
Definitely. I was kind of bummed that I couldn't make it to that presentation, but reading your article and editing it was definitely seemed like a really cool presentation. I was especially interested just to see, talk to him. I didn't get the chance to later in the day, just about like his thoughts on how the church could potentially play a role in organizing. I spent some time like looking at his website and such, and that seems to be something he's very much about. With that, we are unfortunately running out of time, but Andy should be back next week with our regularly scheduled Hoodrat Strategist radio program and his deft leftist analysis of the news. So thank you so much for joining us. Do you have any closing thoughts, Aya?
No, thank you. As you said, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening and supporting WIDR FM 89.1 Kalamazoo. And if that's all for you, Will, then I think
we're good. Once again, thank you.